Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of The Articulate Fly. On this episode, I'm joined by Captain Richard Andrews, owner of Tar-Pam Guide Service. Richard shares his experiences growing up in eastern North Carolina and the great angling opportunities found in the Inner Banks. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. But before we get to the interview, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you like the podcast, please tell a friend, and please subscribe and leave us a review in the podcatcher of your choice. It really helps us out. And a shout out to this episode's sponsor. This episode's sponsored by our friends at Norvise. Their motto is, tie better flies faster, and they produce the only vise that truly spins. Just days ago, our friends at Norvise released their shank jaws to make tying large, articulated streamers even easier. To see for yourself, visit www.nor-vice.com. Don't delay. Supplies are limited. Now, on to our interview. Well, Richard, welcome to the Articulate Fly.
Thanks for having me, Marvin. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation, and we have a tradition on the Articulate Fly. We always ask all of our guests to share their earliest fishing memory.
Well, other than some really early memories of just catching bass in some farm ponds around home in eastern North Carolina, I do have one memory that really sticks out and probably helped shape my life. I was fishing the Hatteras Marlin Club tournament. I was probably in about 5th or 6th grade with my next door neighbor. His dad had a sport fishing boat, and they were avid marlin fishermen, and I just really took a liking to it early on, and we were out there trolling around one day, had spread out, beautiful day, and everybody was inside asleep, and I was the only one out there watching the baits because I was the one that was kind of the most into it. And I saw this small little peanut dolphin just kind of loping through the spread, and it was a little guy, about 5 pounds or so. I said, "Oh, that's kind of weird." He was just hopping along, like skipping on top, and about 30 seconds later, we had a Spanish mackerel skipping down the middle on the short shotgun bait, and about a 600-pound blue marlin came flying out of the water. I mean, literally, he went vertical out of the water and ate that mackerel, and saw the whole fish's body. Fish got hooked and just kind of snapped his head back and forth and frayed that 400-pound leader like it was nothing. But I got to see all of them, and from that moment on, I was just intrigued with the adventure of fishing, and I think really that memory might have helped shape my career a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And so tell us a little bit, because I mean, people that like to fish in salt water are really drawn to the salt. What drew you to saltwater fishing?
Well, I was drawn, after I graduated from college, I was drawn to the Outer Banks to work on the back of offshore charter boats. So, like literally the day after I graduated from college, I moved down to Hatteras and started hitting the docks down there at Hatteras Harbor and Odin's Dock, and finally got a job on a boat down there and worked on that boat for the summer, and that turned into like a 6-year stint of working on offshore charter boats year round, full time, and that really, that early memory and kind of just an early interest in offshore fishing kind of drew me down there. And I've evolved kind of into the fly fishing game, into the inshore saltwater game from that. So a lot of people will start out catching small fish and then kind of evolve into catching bigger fish in bigger water, but I've gone the exact opposite direction.
Interesting. So when did you exactly come to the dark side of fly fishing?
Well, I went to school in Virginia, high school in Virginia, and the school that I went to had a smallmouth river adjacent to it, and so I started fly fishing there when I was in high school. We would pop a bugfish and streamer fish for smallies. It was the Rapidan River, and it was actually a really good smallmouth river. So that's where I started fly fishing, and I kind of took that and just learned from there as I went, and it's just evolved into caught some fish on the fly, some billfish on the fly when I was offshore fishing, and just started poking around home on the rivers, catching stripers, catching shad, catching speckled trout, doing what I do now, and have really learned that there's a lot of opportunities for fly fishing in our area.
Yeah, and speaking of what you do now, when did you know you wanted to become a charter captain?
Well, our original intent when I was offshore fishing was to become an offshore charter boat captain, and so I was heavily involved with that. I was in the thick of that for the longest time, and when I was doing it, it was 20 years ago, and there was diesel fuel hit $3.50 a gallon for the first time, and I was watching these kind of owner operator guys down there at Organelle and Hatteras becoming the industry changed tremendously. They were these owner operators were becoming paid employees by owners. These wealthy owners were buying these boats and upgrading these boats and paying these captains to run them for them. So I didn't like that part of the business, and I just thought the writing on the wall was just hard to make a living doing that. And so I really started getting more interested in inshore fishing and kind of evolved into the inshore game from that.
Yeah, and so how long did it kind of take you to break into the guide game on the inshore fishing?
Well, I've done it off and on, throughout my life, but I really had to just start it, and we moved to the Inner Banks. We wanted to live. When I met my wife, we wanted to live in Washington, North Carolina, so we moved to Washington. I figured that'd be a great place to start a inshore guide service. So we came here, and I started working part-time for one of the river keeper organization here, which was called the Pamlico Tall River Foundation at the time, and now it's called Sound Rivers. But I worked for them Monday through Friday, and then was guiding Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And so I did that for about 2 to 3 years like that, and then eventually I started getting real busy doing what I was doing guiding and had to give up the other job and started guiding full-time. So it all worked out, and little did I know at the time that this area was just really well suited for a year-round guide service. I mean, I could not have picked a better place to set up camp.
Yeah, absolutely. And, who are some of the folks, Richard, that have mentored you on your guide journey, and what did they teach you?
Well, all the fishing here has been more self-taught, just simply putting time on the water and just doing a lot of fishing on my own when I wasn't booked. But early on, the offshore fishing that I did at the beach, that was, I worked in and around some of the, for some of the best and around some of the best captains in the business, and I just saw how dedicated they were to their fishing game and what they were willing to do to catch fish and their work ethics, and that just really translated into. That could have been a better preface to what I do now. Just learning that a 9-to-5 job is not normal. Like, put in more time than needed, getting up early, just making it happen and just putting in that extra effort for the client.
Got it. And, we always ask all of our guide guests on the Articulate Fly to share what they think the biggest misconception people have about the life of a fishing guide.
My clients all the time look at me and say, "You've got the greatest job ever. It just must be so much fun being a fishing guide." And I love what I do. It's a wonderful job, and I really don't want to do anything else. I feel so blessed to do what I do. However, the biggest misconception is that it's easy. It's such a tough job. There's a lot that goes into it. You're running a lot of logistics, a lot of planning, a lot of preparation, a lot of maintenance. You're doing it all too. If you're a owner operator, single guide, you're doing all the booking, all the reservations, running the business, coming home, getting ready for the next day. Something breaks, you have to fix it that next day, that afternoon to get ready for the next morning. It's an around the clock job, and I'll tell anybody who's interested in doing it, it's a great thing to get into, but you better be prepared to work, and you better really, really love it.
Yeah. And speaking of be prepared, you've grown, from just yourself to now you have Tar-Pam Guide Service. Tell us a little bit about how that came together and a little bit of your guide company's history.
Well, we started in 2010, and it was just me, and I, slowly got busier and busier and busier. And, after about 4 years, I started really hitting my stride and really running a lot of trips. And, now I fish about 230 days a year, which is about all I really want to do. That gives me some Sundays off and some holidays off. And, I could probably fish more than that, but I'd just be missing out on a lot of family activities and that sort of thing. I have 2 boys and a wonderful wife, so I need to spend time with them. But, we've got other guys. I have 4 other people that I can give trips to that kind of work underneath me. I have another boat, and they usually run my other boat for me, kind of on a rotational basis or as needed basis, and that helps to alleviate some of the workload that I have, and help us with manage some of our overflow, which we can continue to expand our client base without turning people away.
Yeah, very neat. And I know that you have a mix of light tackle and fly. How does that break down, and how does that translate into different fishing approaches?
Well, we try to be flexible. It really just depends on what the clients want. I mean, we have clients that want to do fly only. We have clients that are willing to mix it up. They'll start out spin fishing, or and then grab a fly rod when we really locate some schooled up fish. We have people that don't want to fly fish at all, so we kind of try to cater to everybody. And I started out that way, just being real flexible. But as we've gotten kind of evolved over the years, we are starting to cater more towards fly fishermen, because we have discovered that this fishery is just tremendous fly fishery. I mean, we can catch anything that we catch on conventional gear on fly. It's just having the right situation, having the right conditions, having the right fly line is important, just for whatever depth you're fishing, because we have a tremendous variety here. We'll fish in the estuary and shallow water, and sometimes in deeper water, and this is water that's not moving very fast. It doesn't have a whole lot of current because we don't have lunar tide in this estuary. It's all wind tide driven, and sometimes we may be up a coastal river fishing in the current, fishing in a deep, fast moving river. So huge variety in how we fly fish, and sometimes it's just not suitable. We can sit there and catch 80 or 100 fish on conventional gear when we might not even hardly be able to get a bite on a fly, and that's tough when I have one of those clients that's just hell bent on keeping a fly rod in his hand all day. And I know we could just burn them up on conventional gear, but we just try to cater to what the client wants to do, and just kind of be realistic about what we can accomplish out there on any given day. And usually it works out. Yeah,
absolutely. And you mentioned a little bit earlier in the interview, that you kind of luckily picked probably the perfect place to set up a year-round guide business. Can you tell us a little bit about the Inner Banks and how it's different from other inshore fisheries?
Well, we have, what I call our big four saltwater species, which is our speckled trout, redfish, flounder, and striped bass. Those are primarily what I target. And we have those mostly in the estuary, but we also have our coastal rivers, which have a huge population of striped bass in the wintertime and the spring when they spawn. So we have those species kind of in both areas. We have some other species that come in, like our giant redfish. They come in to spawn in August and September into the Pamlico, and we also have some tarpon that move in the summer. I don't do much tarpon fishing, but there's some guys who do. And then, of course, we have a ton of freshwater species in our estuary and creeks. See, our creeks here have a salinity gradient. So as you go up in the tributaries, the backs of the tributaries, the front of the creeks may be pretty salty, and then you'll go to the back and you'll start picking up freshwater species like pumpkin seed brim, largemouth bass, bowfin, gar, crappie, white perch, things like that. So it's not uncommon for us to go kind of target our big four, I call it, and then move into a creek and catch freshwater species. We've had trips where we'll catch 10 or 12 different species of fish in one day.
Yeah, very neat. And for listeners that aren't familiar with this type of ecosystem, can you tell people why these estuary systems are so incredibly productive?
Well, first and foremost, they're nursery areas for juvenile fish. So we have, that's where a lot of our saltwater species spawn, and they're the young fish, live here until they become old enough to either, like for striped bass. Let's take striped bass as an example. They're born in our rivers, they're spawned in our rivers, and then they grow up here for about the first 5 years of their life. If they make it to age 5 or 6, they immigrate out of the estuary to the ocean. They join the ocean population, the Atlantic Ocean population, which migrates up and down the eastern seaboard. And then if they continue to return, as the females at least, to spawn in the river where they were born, just like salmon. So they live here. year round in the estuary or in the rivers for the first few years of their life, and then they join a totally separate population of fish out in the ocean. And redfish do that too. There's a lot of migration in and out of our inlets associated with the estuary, and it's just a really dynamic system. I'd say it's the second largest estuary in the country next to the Chesapeake Bay, but it's not tidal. We have tide areas behind the inlets, and it's really only behind the inlets. When you go down to the southern Pamlico Sound, where the Pamlico Sound meets the Core Sound near Cedar Island, North Carolina, that's where the ecosystem changes. You kind of lose that wind tide estuary, and it becomes more of a tidal salt marsh system from there south. So we're up here in the wind tide estuary, and they're down there, from Cedar Island south in the tidal salt marsh, which is a totally different system. It fishes differently. They have the same species, but it's just a whole lot different in a lot of ways.
Yeah, got it. And, obviously people are, I'm sure, familiar with the challenges in the Chesapeake Bay. Are there any ecological challenges or any kind of other fishery challenges that you want to let folks know about?
Well, not unlike anywhere else. We've had our sets of challenges over the years. Back in the 80s, we had nutrient problems where we have algal blooms in the estuary, mostly caused by farm runoff from confined animal feeding operations, whether it's hog or poultry, but also just row crop farming. So we have, Eastern North Carolina has a tremendous amount of farming, and a lot of our creeks have been channelized. Historically they were wetland systems up at the headwaters, and now they're, you go up to the head of a creek, and instead of turning into a big old swamp, it just turns into a huge canal, and it's draining. One creek might be draining, 20, 30, 40,000 acres of farmland. So we've got inputs coming from the farms. Of course, we have stormwater runoff from our municipalities upriver, but no problems that are not unique to any other system.
Got it. And I know you're involved with the Pamlico Tar River Foundation to kind of address some of those issues and keep an eye on the watershed. Can you tell us a little bit about the work you do for them?
Well, I used to work for them, but I just kind of I work with them now, just telling them if I see something wrong. They're doing some good work these days. They're really just our watchdogs for our system, and they have a lot of battles. I mean, they're fighting proposed mines, and there was a limestone mine that was going to go in at the headwaters of one of our creeks here, Blunt's Creek, off the Pamlico River, and they fought that battle and they won. They delayed that at least. So they have a ton of stuff on their plate. But when I see something on the water, I try to let them know about it and try to help them in that way. But they're really good organization. We need them around. The CCA is very active in North Carolina. They've been doing some good work trying to fight some of these fisheries conservation battles that we're working on. And North Carolina is just a really backwards state for fisheries management. We've had lots of favor towards the commercial industry. And I'm not against commercial fish. I like fresh seafood, but it's just ridiculous. It's to the point where the state is just almost unfriendly to recreational fishermen. So it's a very hard place to do business in that regard. But despite that, we still have great fishing and I'm able to have a good business. So I'm lucky in that aspect. But we have a lot of fights on our hands, and I wish North Carolina could get on board with what a lot of the other states have done. If they could do that, our fishing would be second to none. It would just be incredible. So we have great fishing, but could it be better? Absolutely.
And are some of those issues, I don't follow the saltwater conservation issues as closely, but I assume it's probably maybe around striped bass, and I think gill netting has been an issue. What are some of the issues that were a little bit different than other places up and down the Mid-Atlantic?
Well, in my opinion, there's four main issues. One, we have inshore trawling that occurs in the Pamlico Sound, and there's a ton of bycatch associated with that. To catch a pound of shrimp, there's been good scientific studies to show that 3 to 4 or 5 to 5 pounds of bycatch are caught for every pound of shrimp. That's a tremendous amount of waste. And these are juvenile croakers, spot, gray trout, flounder, crabs, and an assortment of other species. That's number one. Number two is our inshore gill netting. There's just a lot of waste associated with that too. It's just non-selective a lot of times, even though they say it is. It's not as selective as they make it out to be. The third thing is commercial fishing licenses. We've got a lot of licenses out there, and there's a lot of, and not all of the, only a small portion, or maybe even half or a third. I couldn't quite say the exact number of all those licenses are real full-time professional commercial fishermen. There's a lot of guys that have like a lawn service, they mow grass during the week and then they go set gill nets on the weekend, that sort of thing. That needs to go away. Commercial fishing license reform needs to be looked at seriously because they can't really account for what's being taken out of the system. So that's an issue. Another issue is the fact that we have dual agencies managing our resource. We've got the Wildlife Resource Commission, which is in charge of our hunting and our inland fisheries, our freshwater fishes. And then we have the Division of Marine Fisheries, which is in charge of managing our coastal fisheries. We've got two different agencies that don't necessarily see eye to eye, that have different conservation ethics as well. The division tends to be a lot less conservation oriented than the Wildlife Resource Commission, and they are usually under a lot more criticism from the recreational community. So if we can get those agencies combined under one, it'd be a lot more efficient. It would save the taxpayers a lot of money from a management standpoint and a law enforcement standpoint. So we've got some issues here. Every state has issues, but in my eyes, those are the biggest issues that we have. And if we can get some of those under control and maybe change, our fishery would be, the potential is huge. I mean, we'd be right there with Florida or Louisiana easily.
Well, I'm a little bit biased because I have family from Eastern North Carolina. I know you grew up there, but for my listeners, Richard, who don't live in Eastern North Carolina or who've never visited, can you tell us a little bit about the region's flavor?
Yeah, Eastern North Carolina is definitely a unique area. I grew up here in Tarboro on the Tar River, so just upriver where I live now, which is in Bath. But it's a great place. A lot of farming. That's our biggest industry here is farming. A lot of fishing. But we have, a lot of our lifestyle in Eastern North Carolina, especially on the rivers, is dictated by our fish migrations. Like right now, we just started our shad run for the year. And there's an old saying in Tarboro, it's not March Madness, it's March Shadness. So when March Shadness arrives, everybody's out and about on the river catching shad. We have a tremendous run of hickory and American shad that come up the Tar, as well as the Noose, the Roanoke, and the Cape Fear. The Roanoke's probably has the highest numbers of shad, but the other rivers are really good too. So we have a shad run in March, late February, March. We have a striped bass run after that, where they come to spawn in April and May. So yeah, a lot of our lifestyle here is dictated by the hunting and fishing seasons. Waterfowl hunting is huge. There's a lot of that goes on in my immediate area here. But it's just a great place to live. It's very laid back. If you like laid back small town lifestyle around that has great hunting and fishing resources, and Eastern North Carolina is a great place to live. Yeah,
if you like barbecue, hush puppies, and sweet tea too, right?
Only barbecue with vinegar-based sauce. That's the only real barbecue in our book.
Yep, and no red slaw.
That's right. Yeah, that's a Western North Carolina thing.
Yeah,
but no, Eastern North Carolina is a great place, and so are the mountains of North Carolina. I'd say we've got two great parts of the state, and a lot of stuff sandwiched between them. But we've, really, North Carolina is a very diverse state. We're very blessed here.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched a little bit on your striper fishing, and I guess you've kind of got two separate striper games, right? Because I think your winter striper fishing is very different than what you're getting ready to gear up for here for the spring. You want to tell folks a little bit about that?
Yeah, our winter season runs roughly from December through the pre-spawn period, which would be late March, early April. We're just targeting resident striped bass in the lower river systems. They use our lower coastal rivers as, when I say lower coastal rivers, I'm talking about the Neuse River above New Bern, the Tar River above Washington, and the Roanoke River itself, the flowing portion of the Roanoke River, from the mouth up. So they use the lower and middle sections of these rivers as wintering grounds, and they roam around and feed all winter long. So we're chasing after those schooled up fish, and the Roanoke is probably the king of them all as far as numbers goes. We catch, on a slow day up there, we'll catch 20, 30, 40 fish. When it's really fishing well, it's not uncommon at all to catch 100 or more in a trip. I mean, sometimes 150, 200. It's just big schools of fish. So we're hunting those down in the winter. Now in the spring, the fish migrate up to their spawning grounds on the various rivers, and that's all water temperature driven. They usually start to move up the rivers as the water temperatures climb in the high 50s and low 60s as it warms up, and they'll spawn around, most of the time, around 66 to 68 degree water. And so peak spawning usually occurs in our rivers somewhere between, usually the first 2 weeks, between the end of April and the middle of May, somewhere in there. It's a moving target every year, but that's usually when these fish spawn. So we fish them all winter. We fish them up to the pre-spawn period. We fish them during the spawn on their spawning grounds, and then after they spawn, they'll come back down the rivers. Some of them will linger up on the spawning grounds and kind of in the middle section of the rivers, and we'll fish them there as well. But they tend to congregate back on the lower end post-spawn, like late May and early June. So striper fishing pretty much takes me from the holidays all the way through the winter and the spring until about the late part of May. And then that's when I move into my Pamlico fishing for the what I call the mixed bag, which is the speckled trout, redfish, flounder, sometimes striped bass as well. So I spend about half of my year on the rivers chasing stripers and shad, and I spend about the other half in the estuary chasing the other fish.
Got it. And in terms of, from a fly tackle and fly approach, how are you fishing for the stripers?
Well, it depends on where we are. We catch them in the estuary. A lot of times we'll catch them in 3 to 6 feet of water with no current. So we're using, if they'll hit poppers, we'll catch them on poppers on top. We do that a lot in the summer, or anytime it's warm. Really, that top water game is an option. But if they're feeding subsurface and not hitting up on top, we'll use just a sink tip line, like a short sink tip, like a 10-foot sink tip, and so that the fly will get down in the water column fast if we're kind of moving on the boat and trying to cover water. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it'll just get down, and then we just start stripping it in. We don't have to wait on it too long. Or in some cases, we may even use an intermediate line. It just all depends on what depth we're in. Now, if we're up in the rivers, we'll fish sink tip lines, but they're 30-foot leg core lines, like a full. They're not really called full sinking lines, but they're more of a striper line. It's a 30-foot sinking line with an intermediate running line. So in some cases, we'll use up to a 450 grain. Like in the Roanoke River, where it's deep, up in Weldon, where the water's fast on the spawning ground, we'll throw a 450 a lot, and that's what it takes to get the fly down to them.
Got it. And do you have any favorite flies?
Well, I mean, the articulated flies, of course, are great catching flies. Stripers aren't too picky. If you get it in front of their face and twist it, they'll usually eat it. We use a lot of clousers. I've used, a lot of times I'll rig a clouser in tandem. I'll have a dropper, and I'll have 2 clousers about a foot apart, 1.5 feet apart. And when you twist them, they'll kind of dance. And so we do that a lot when we're fishing the estuary. And out of the current, sometimes we'll catch 2 stripers on one rod. We'll catch a striper or redfish, or sometimes a striper and a speckled trout or speckled trout and redfish. We caught every combination of fish there is on one fly and on the other. It's pretty amazing. We started using that a lot, and it's been real effective. But if we're in bigger fish, like 25 and 30 inch reds and stripers, you don't want a double because it's hard to handle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Single fly is going to work better. But yeah, I started using a lot of the game changers. They're working really well for me. They really respond well to them. But we certainly like topwater. If we can catch them on top, we'll throw a popper or a crease fly.
Yeah, and so do they get turned on to cicadas? I mean, do you have the annual cicadas down in your part of the world? Is that what they're trying to get when they eat on top?
Usually when they're eating on top, they're either chasing menhaden on top, like they push bait up to the surface and you can see birds on them and they're crashing through bait balls, or they're chasing shrimp. A lot of times when our shrimp come out of our creeks in the summer and usually late June time frame, we'll have a shrimp migration where you start seeing the shrimp coming out of the creeks, and they'll migrate out of the creeks into the main river, and there'll be shrimp up and down the river shorelines out in the Pamlico River. And a lot of times you can see the birds. The birds will be kind of hovering over top of them, and you'll go over there and you'll see shrimp flying out of the water, and stripers or trout or reds underneath them chasing shrimp. And they'll eat a topwater bait quickest when they're chasing shrimp. It's amazing.
Yeah, very neat. And, you talked about kind of as things started to warm up, kind of moving back to kind of your grab bag fishing. When do you start targeting puppy drum inshore?
Our puppy drum, we can catch our puppy drum year round. Of course, they're tougher to catch in the winter. Our best puppy drum fishing tends to be in the spring, and right on through the summer and in the fall. I would say if I had to pick one of the best times for it would be the late summer, early fall, like August, September, October is probably the three most prime puppy drum months we have. And then we'll catch them, depending on our weather in the fall, we'll catch them right on through the late fall, sometimes November, December. And they tend to school up more in higher numbers as it gets colder too. You'll see them in bigger groups.
Got it. And is it a sight fishing game, or is the water kind of deeper and a little bit murkier, and it's not the kind of what people think of when they're in the Spartina grass, maybe say down in South Carolina?
Yeah. So our water is not that clear. And so most of the time we're having to look for other clues to know there's fish there, like bait abundance. You get in the area where there's a lot of bait and you see the bait being chased, or you know there's a lot of bait there, but you see a point where there's some current going around the point, some wind blowing current. Those are types of places we key in on. We don't usually see the fish. There are some rare occasions with the redfish where we do see them up in some shallow water, some clear areas, but as a whole, we do not do a lot of sight fishing here just because we don't have the clarity of the water.
Got it. And so are they generally eating like small bait fish imitations and crab and shrimp imitations? For reds, most of what I use is just a bait fish, a streamer, a bait fish imitation. So you're talking about kind of you could catch the puppy drum kind of year round, but you were saying it was kind of like the late summer, very, very early fall, that those massive drum that you see these guys holding these massive drum in their laps. That's when you target those?
Yeah, so they're two different groups of fish. So we have the resident juveniles, they might be 10 inches long all the way up to 30, 32 inches long. They're kind of like the stripers, though. Once they reach a certain age, usually about age 4, I think might be, roughly, they start to leave. They don't hang around after that age. So we see them grow up to about 25 to 30 inch range, and after that, they're gone. They're out in the ocean. So it's just a habitat preference thing. They prefer to be out there with the adults once they reach that age. So we have the juveniles. They're growing up here until they reach that age. And then we have the adults that return here in August and September to spawn. So our giant red drum season, which is a huge attraction, starts in. We catch them as early as I've caught some giant. We have some giant fish that actually some people think never leave. That maybe just a few residents. I've caught them as early as May and as late as December. But most of our consistent catches of those big fish starts in July, like mid to late July, and it'll run into early October. And the peak fishing is probably from the middle of August through the end of September. Those fish are all typically over 40 inches. 40 to 50. We see them 40 to 52 inches, with the vast majority of them probably being in the 44 to 49 inch range. 50 incher is a really big one. And I've seen them up to 52, but that's not an everyday fish.
Right. And I assume they're out in deeper water. So how does that change the way you fish for them on the fly?
Well, what we do with them, unless they're up on top busting, which we see that sometimes, they're up on top chasing bait, flying through the water, cutting across the top. We actually started seeing that more and more in the last few years. So we can actually sight fish them in a way. But what we're typically doing is looking for bait up on top. Bait balls, nervous bait balls up on the surface of the water. They're being pushed up by those drums. The drum is there. They're underneath them. But so what you're doing is you're throwing a fly into the bait ball, trying to get a bite, trying to get the drum's attention, somehow, whether it's a noisy, like a popping fly, or just a streamer, something that could get their attention. And it's tough. Catching on the fly is hard, the big ones. A lot of times we'll use conventional gear, and then when the situation presents itself, we'll throw a fly. But you can catch them on flies. It's challenging, but it can be done.
Yeah, and I would imagine, do you upsize your fly compared to the bait to kind of try to, increase the chances that you capture their attention?
Yeah, if you throw a streamer with a big profile through a bait ball and twitch it aggressively, it's going to stand out. They're going to see it. They're going to know it's there. It's just a matter of picking the right bait ball that has fish in it. You might hit 10 bait balls and not get a bite, and then there's that one bait ball that you might hook 2 or 3 fish out of. So it's just a game of numbers. A great fly to use for this big drum is a musky fly, big articulated musky fly. If I have people that can throw it in the wind, we'll use those. We'll use big poppers. Anything that creates a lot of attention and noise, they like.
Interesting. And of course, you can't talk about fall in the Inner Banks without talking about false albacore fishing. You want to tell us a little bit about that, Richard?
I'm not one of the hardcore albie guys. Like there's guys that go down there for the whole albie season and albie fish, but I do it. I offer it, and I have clients that want to do it, and I'll take them. So I get to do it just on the side, but it's not my primary fall activity. But I absolutely love it. I'll go down to Harker's Island and put in there, and when they're really active up on top, it's not very difficult. You just have to have your tackle right. There's not a whole lot of room for error. And they can be quite picky. They're very size-driven and color-driven at times. So you need to have an assortment of flies that match whatever they're eating. They can be real particular about the size of the fly. If it doesn't match the size of their bait, sometimes they'll turn it down. But it's an awesome fishery. It's one of probably the premier fly fisheries on the eastern seaboard. And I mean, I'm there when it's good. I'm down there doing it.
Yeah. And so when does the false albacore season usually run?
Usually they start showing up in good numbers by about the end of September, early part of October. Kind of a moving target every year. But then it lasts through October and through November. And usually, if it's a late season, they might hang around until Thanksgiving or even like early December, but that's kind of rare. Usually the 2 months that we think of for albie season are October and November. And a lot of times the bigger fish are caught later in the season. There's 18, 20-pound albies come in November versus October. A lot of times early in the season, they're a little smaller. They might be those 6-pounders and 8-pounders and 10-pounders. But sometimes they're in great numbers.
Yeah, very neat. It's on my to-do list. I haven't gotten around to it yet.
Well, we'll have to go do it sometime, Marvin.
Yeah, you bet. So I think you mentioned, we haven't talked about speckled trout. Are there any other species you want to talk about or that you chase that you want to let folks know about?
Well, like I said, the big four, we target specks, and and redfish and flounder. Well, we don't do a lot of as much flounder fishing as we used to. Believe it or not, I have caught some flounder on the fly before. They will hit a clouser pretty readily, or any kind of streamer. But we used to do a lot more of that than we do now. And then, of course, the stripers. So that's primarily what we target on fly, and that keeps us busy year round.
Absolutely. And why don't you let folks know what it's like to be out on the water with you or one of your other guides for the day?
Well, what we do is we have a lodge now in Bath that we built last year. This is a very rural area. Once you get too far east in our area, it just starts to get more and more rural. So places to stay are a precious commodity. So we build a house in Bath where we house most of our clients, and what they'll do is they'll meet us at the boat ramp in the morning, and we'll launch early and get going for a nice, exciting day of fishing. And usually, most of our people like to fish 6 hours. We offer 4, 6, and 8 hour trips, but they are by far our best selling trip is a 3/4 day, 6 hours. It seems to be just the right amount of time on the water, not too much and not too short. And it's just we start early, and then we're usually wrapping it up by early afternoon.
Yeah, and I imagine the good thing too, right, is since you're not in a tidal system, you don't have to sit there and track the tide charts quite as closely as other people that guide on the salt do.
No, we don't have to fish by the tides. We fish early one, because it's in the summer, particularly it's more productive in the mornings, early before it gets too hot. But the winds in our area, we have a sea breeze that blows off Pamlico Sound in the afternoons here, and it can get quite fast and quite tough, and really just kind of wipe us all out late afternoon. It's not uncommon at all by about 2 or 3 o'clock for it to be blowing 25 out of the southeast, and it's nice because it cools everything down here a little bit, and it blows right off the sound. Blows up the rivers, which most of our rivers are kind of oriented roughly east-west, and so the southeast sea breeze comes right in off the sound and cools everything off. But we like to get out there and fish before that really gets kicking.
Yeah, a little too much chop, right?
Yeah, I don't do a lot of afternoon trips in the summer. It's usually just too windy.
Yeah. Well, before I let you hop tonight, Richard, why don't you let folks know the best places online to follow your fishing adventures and how they can book a day with you?
Well, we have a website, our website, www.tarpamguide.com. I try to keep a fairly updated fishing report on my blog there. And all the information about what I do is on my website. Of course, we're on Facebook and Instagram as well. You can find us easily on there. And if you want to book a trip, the best way to do it is just shoot me an email at richard@tarpamguide.com or give me a call on my cell, and I promise I'll try to get back to you within a day.
Well, that's awesome, and I'll drop all that stuff in the show notes.
Yeah, appreciate that, Marvin.
Yeah, absolutely, and I really appreciate you carving a little bit of time out this evening to talk with me.
Me too. It's been a privilege to be on here, and I hope folks can get to know me a little bit better through the podcast. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Have a great evening.
You too, Marvin.
Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed that as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. Again, if you like the podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review and rating in the podcatcher of your choice. And don't forget to check out Norvice's new shank jaws at www.nor-vice.com. Tight lines, everybody.